God calls Christians to obey authority, Romans 13, 1-7. But there are exceptions, and I'll explain. The most hotly debated issue today is what the pagan left often calls gender-affirming care or gender-affirming surgery. And over half of our U.S. states are in a major legal battle over this issue, which as Christians we just call a heinous evil. Part and parcel to this war on God-given gender is the role of parents, and whether they or we have the right to speak into and redirect our children from harm. And if you're a Christian parent who's wrestling between God and government and your parental rights, there's one principle and then a few implications that you need to know. For starters, the principle, something Abraham Kuyper coined sphere sovereignty, it just simply means that God has ordained unique spheres that each have their own place in creation because they fulfill what he called creational purposes. Kuyper pulled this from our perfect example, the Lord Jesus, who designated unique spheres when teaching his disciples to render to Caesar things that are Caesar's, and then to God things that are God's. Thus, historically, Christians have identified three main spheres of God's creation: the church, the government, and the family. And these structures were designed by God to uphold society, and if you lose them, it becomes anarchy. Now, given there's some overlap, a civil magistrate will have input on how a church building's constructed, or a son could become the employer of his father. But generally speaking, citizens submit to government in civil matters. Children submit to parents in family matters, and believers should submit to church elders in ecclesiastical matters. And to be clear, this principle is part of Protestant history and was a founding principle of religious freedom for our entire nation. As you would expect, the distinctions between spheres of authority only become an issue when they are in conflict. For example, when the church attempts to rule all of society, or the civil government interferes with worship, or one family attempts to break the law and harm others. And that right there, the conflict of spheres, is where Western culture and government is now overstepping, albeit forcing sick and demonic evils on our kids. Drag queen story hours, sex ed education, mutilating of body parts. So although we want to be law-abiding citizens, submitting to our government, the last thing we should be known for is revolution, anger, or hostility. We do serve a higher authority, the Lord Jesus Christ, which means that there are and can be exceptions to our civil compliance. And here they are. Number one is when given an order to do what is wrong. Meaning when an authority issues a command requiring we violate God's law, we won't comply with the order. And examples in the Bible are plenty. From the Hebrew midwives who refused Pharaoh's orders to kill babies, Rahab wouldn't give up the spies, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego wouldn't bow to the graven image. And exception number two is when given an order to stop doing what is right, which just means the opposite of exception number one, where governing officials command we stop doing what God commands we should be doing. Again, there's plenty of biblical examples, like Moses leading Israel against Pharaoh's orders, Daniel praying when he was told not to, and Peter preaching when he was told to stop. And exception number three is when given an order to stay silent in the face of evil, meaning when a governing authority openly violates the law of God, believers are right to condemn the evil and rebuke the sinful behavior. And again, the Bible is replete with examples, as Nathan confronted David for murder and adultery, and Elijah called out Ahab, and John the Baptist rebuked Herod for incest. So when we're faced with a culture or a government that orders us to do wrong, or orders us to stop doing what is right, or orders us to stay silent in the face of obvious evil, or even all three, we remain respectful, we don't stir up revolution, but we let it be known clearly that we cannot comply, and we will speak up due to our resolute obedience to the Lordship of Christ. So friend, as the pagan nation and its sex cult continues its path toward the abyss, have no qualms of conscience, have no pause in your spirit, and no nervous brow standing for what is right, for living for what is true, and for fighting for your family.